Number 1. Jack. I wasn't raised under the idea that Halloween is the time when people play tricks on each other. Despite trick being in the trick-or-treat phrase itself. But I guess I was always much more concentrated on the treat part of the equation than I was on the trick. But still, I like to tell myself that what happens in the Halloween story was nothing more than a trick, since no person ended up getting hurt, and nothing has happened since. I think that, in a way, it might be confirmation that I'm right about that. I own a house in an old neighborhood, and what I mean by that is that there are a whole lot of really old houses in my neighborhood. They are not all big, expensive old houses. It's a really lower middle class type of neighborhood. But I like it. And although I may have bought the house mostly because it was inexpensive, I really do like living here. There is not really any trick-or-treating going on here anymore. There is a large warehouse that normally houses a flea market. They do sort of a controlled trick-or-treating operation from there. People set up booths, or just sit in folding chairs, with bowls of candy, and kids walk up to each of the people at the booths and trick-or-treat that way. Personally, I don't really like that, and I always buy candy just in case I might come across the occasional kid who wants to still trick-or-treat by the houses. But it doesn't happen anymore. A few years before the trick-or-treating stopped in my neighborhood, I did have an experience that might make some people happy to not have it anymore. By this point, I had lived in my house for about 5 years. The trick-or-treating had long since been dying down, but I continued to go along. I even remember the candy that I was giving out that year. It was bags of Skittles. As I wasn't expecting many children to come around, I fixed myself up a bowl of popcorn and got some soda so I could watch horror movies that evening. The bulk of the children that I got that day were before evening. It was a cold and somewhat dreary day, perfect for Halloween. But once the sun began setting, the already sparse amount of trick-or-treaters began to thin out even more. I got 1 or 2 children as the sun was setting. The last trick-or-treater that came to my house that evening came within an hour after sunset. It was an older kid, maybe around 13 years old. I assumed it was a boy. He was wearing a sheet over himself. You know, the typical ghost costume that people make when they don't want to buy a costume or make a more creative one. He did, however, have small chains sewed into the sheets as well. They were very small chains, as if they were taken off the swings of a child's swing set. He didn't say trick or treat. That's why I didn't know for sure that it was a boy. He just stood there, and he was looking at me. "You're lucky," I told him as I got my bowl of candy. "Or at least you're lucky if you like Skittles," I went on. "I haven't gotten many kids coming by today, so I can give you a whole bunch of candy." He was still silent. It didn't bother me, though. I just figured that he was playing the part of the ghost. When people tell stories about times that they see real ghosts, you never really hear that the ghosts were talking to them. So I took a huge handful of Skittles and put them in his bag. He nodded his head at me, which I assumed was his way of thanking me, and then he turned and went on his way. I was feeling pretty good, actually. I really felt at that point like having that one kid getting into the spirit and thanking me with a nod made up for the fact that trick-or-treating was dying. Some people at least didn't want it to. I went back to watching my movie. It was maybe about a half hour later when something caught my eye. My television sits on an entertainment center, and there's a normal-sized window right beside it. I noticed some sort of movement in the window, and it distracted me. But when I looked out the window, there was nothing there. I chalked it up to just being uneasy about the movie I was watching, and I went back to watching it. I got up later in the night to go and get something to drink from the kitchen. When I was walking back to the living room, I heard something on the porch. It was late, but I thought it might be a trick-or-treater. I went to the door, just in time to see the ghost from earlier running away from my home. I was startled because I began to think that I might have been seeing him in the window. Perhaps he'd been watching me. So I went over and unlocked the door to look and see where he was going. And that was when I noticed it. There was a jack-o'-lantern sitting on the porch, and it was not one that I made. Curious, I went over to the jack-o'-lantern and opened it. It wasn't lit, but I could smell something coming from inside it. And this may disgust you, so be prepared. I do not really know exactly what was in the jack-o'-lantern, but it was horrible. It was some sort of flesh. I don't know if it was an animal or what kind of animal or what, but it was the insides of something, and it was wrapped in barbed wire. It was the nastiest thing I had ever seen in my life. I dropped the pumpkin on the porch. I ran back into the house. I called the police, and they took a lot of time to get there. The police dismissed it, telling me it was just a holiday prank. I thought that was nonsense because the thing was disgusting and seemed to be something formerly living. And there was nothing they could do. We couldn't identify the person in the ghost costume, so it was a dead end. I didn't sleep well that night. For days I couldn't get that vision out of my head. It was awful. And I don't know why anybody could be so cruel and disgusting. Number 2. The Party. This is a bit of a different kind of story. I wanted to start by suggesting that you might not find it scary enough, but that seems to happen all the time. It's about something that happened at a Halloween party. At the time I was in college. I was staying in a fraternity house. When Halloween was coming around, and this year, the day was on an actual weekend, my fraternity decided to have a party on Halloween Day. I've always found Halloween parties to be a little frightening on a certain level. I mean, technically, I guess they should be scary, since that is sort of the point of Halloween. But it's not really the costumes or anything that scare me. It's not that I believe in monsters or anything, but with all those costumes, it's very possible for just about anybody to be under those costumes. And that's what freaks me out. Not knowing who I'm looking at. It was a bit worse too because this was my first year living in the frat house. There was going to be a lot of people at the party, and I was sure I wouldn't know the majority of them. I could just feel myself getting apprehensive when I was first told about the party, and it just got worse the closer and closer it was getting. I actually considered just spending the whole night in my room by myself, but none of the guys were having that. So I came down for the party. I didn't have much of a costume. I disliked being in costumes nearly as much as I hated being around others who were wearing them. In fact, I was more or less dressed up as a college student, which really wasn't much of a stretch for me to play. Now, being a fraternity house, it wasn't our first party, but we didn't party as much as you might think, if you watch a lot of college movies. I'm sure some frats might, but we didn't. but we had had a couple parties before the Halloween one. And my biggest problem with the whole thing was it was weird, having your entire home open to people. I mean, even now, I have a house and we have an occasional party, but no one heads into the bedrooms or anything like that. But the frat parties, you literally couldn't keep anyone out of those rooms. I mean, the only way you could is if you went in the room yourself and locked yourself in. All of this I'm telling you because I want you to know how anxious or on edge I was. There were so many reasons to not be comfortable. The party got very, very wild, too. There were tons of people drinking, screwing around. Hell, some of the people were even having sex in rooms that were not theirs. It was the closest thing I'd ever seen to actually being in a college movie. Well, I had a few drinks, but nothing like my friends who got really, really drunk. And when the party got to be too much for me, I went into my room, closed the door, and put some earplugs in. You might think that makes me a party pooper, but I don't really believe that. So I turned the lights off and went to sleep. I'm actually surprised that I was able to do it, but I did finally drift off. I woke up. It was dark in the room, and I didn't know exactly why I woke up. It took my eyes a moment to adjust, but when I did, I noticed my closet door had been opened, and there was a shadow of a figure in the doorway. At first the shadow was sitting down, but it rose to its feet. When my eyes became more adjusted to the darkness, I noticed that it was a woman, and she was staring at me. She must have gotten into my closet before I came to my room. I am a Killer Orange Cat fan, so I should have known to check in my closet before I went to bed. The shadow walked up to me. She was holding something, and she also had a glow stick or something now too, and I could see what she was holding. It was a thin fillet knife. My heart began pounding in my chest, and the glow stick, I noticed that it was a girl named Kelly. She had been dating a guy named Brad in the frat, and they'd had a horrible breakup a week beforehand. Kelly walked up closer to me, and I could not move. Remember, I told you I'm a very anxious person. She put her hand on the blanket, and I was worried when she pulled it off. I was laying there in nothing but my boxer shorts. "You jackass," she told me. "You break up with me, I'm gonna make sure you never have sex again." When she told me that, she took the knife. She brought it down to the front of my boxers, and I felt this wave of fear just flow through me. I wanted to talk, but only a weird gurgling sound came out. When she traced my private area with the fillet knife, she slightly pushed it a little bit. That made me finally blurt out, I'm not Brad, I'm Sean." She stopped tracing the knife, but she didn't move it off. "Sean?" she asked. "Ah, fuck it. This is motherfucking stupid. I went into the wrong fucking room." When Kelly was shouting, she was waving the fillet knife all over the place. I knew how sharp those things were, and I was scared of getting cut. I tried to calm her down, but she was literally fucking crazy. "Where is Sean?" she screamed. I couldn't answer her, as she was going crazy. "I'm gonna get that asshole," she yelled, and then she kicked my bed violently. Turning, she went to the door, unlocked it, and went out. I immediately locked my door and called the police. Kelly didn't go to find Sean, though. She left the frat house in a fury. I don't know if she was serious, or she just wanted to scare Brad. I mean, she scared the hell out of me. Nothing really came out of it, though. Number 3. The Shed. Thank you, Killer Orange Cat, for taking the time to translate my story. I know enough English to enjoy listening to stories, but not a lot more. It was easier to write this in Japanese, and I hope that your listeners will like my story. Halloween is not as big in Japan, like it is in America. Although trick-or-treating does happen in some places in Japan, it is very rare. Halloween is very much about dressing up and being in character when you are in a costume. If you don't know that much about Japan, I should tell you that the belief in ghosts and other supernatural things are believed by most people. So seeing a spirit or something like that, even though it can be very scary, is not as unexpected to happen over here. This obviously happened on Halloween. I do not know if it was real, or if it was someone playing a prank on me. Maybe it was someone who just dressed up in a costume. Some people play very mean pranks over here. I was alone in my home on Halloween night. I was enjoying a scary Japanese movie. Suddenly, my little dog began barking. She had been laying on the chair with me, but she got up and ran to the back of the room. At that time, I was watching the movie in my room. It was on the second story of the house. I got up to go and see what the dog was barking at. When I went to the window, I looked around the backyard, and there was somebody in my backyard. It was getting dark, but it wasn't totally dark yet. The person was standing there. Her skin looked like it had been burned. She had almost no hair, and the hair she had was frizzled from being burned. She looked up at me, and then she lowered herself backwards. She did what I think people call a crab walk. She was on all fours, but on her back, and she crawled across the yard and into my shed. I didn't know what to do. I know that everyone should think that I should call the police right away, but that's not the regular response here. I wasn't going to call the police and tell them what looked like a burned dead woman crawled backwards across my yard and into my shed. Instead, I made sure all the doors were locked. I mean, if she were really a ghost, that wouldn't help me. But if she were a person playing a Halloween joke, it helped. I waited by the window and watched to see if she could come out. Eventually, my parents got home. When I told my father about what happened, he went out to explore the shed. He never found a single thing. I watched that woman crawl into the shed. The only time I wasn't watching the shed was when I was locking all the doors. So she either escaped while I was doing that, or she was a ghost. I do not know of any women in the area who were killed by a house fire. I do not know if the woman I noticed was a ghost, or someone playing a Halloween prank on me. I never saw her again, but I was scared every time I go out to the shed. Hey Killer Orange Cat here. We're getting closer to Halloween, and I did promise you guys more content this week. So I'm going to do my best to continue to entertain you on Halloween week. I'm going to run that countdown thing every day, just because I think it's cute. Just an homage to Halloween 3, the Season of the Witch. I promised to do shoutouts for everyone who responded to my pinned post, so shoutouts are for Elkie, Chimera Cat, Don Stone, Nancy. Oh, Nancy, I love you, but I've never tried to pronounce your name. I hope it's Nancy Machio. If I got that wrong, I apologize very much. Project 237. Gringo 300 asked if it was the Simpsons Halloween special, but no. I am parodying Halloween 3, the Season of the Witch. But thank you for everybody who appreciated my little joke there. Like I said, I will be continuing it all week. And if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below. or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story that you would like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the email address included in the description. But always, most importantly, and like Sean, the frat boy, forgot to do, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat, or possibly a lady with a fillet knife who wants to cut your privates off, might be hiding. Good night.